Among them stride Syrene of the Ampithere Division, called by some the silver-haired Huntress, and bearing the grim title Worm's Bane. A famed spear and harpoon cadre of the Dreythal kingdom, renowned for their ruthless precision and brutal code of merit. From the Killer and Keeper universe, the Ampithere Division's organization is rigid and merciless. Warriors are ranked not by birth, but by the tally of drakes slain, their hierarchy marked by ceremonial brands seared into flesh. The names of its most feared Talon marshals are still whispered in dread. Marshal Vaethra the Pallid, whose ivory harpoon pierced the hearts of 3 skyworms in a single night. Goran the Chainsworn, who bound himself in the molten links of drake-forged iron after slaying the Leviathan of the Cold Beach. And Sir Kael'thas Wormreaver, whose helm was wrought from the skull of the elder drake Galmarch. Their infamous campaigns include the Siege of the Scorched Ares, where the division burned out a drake brood entrenched atop the basalt cliffs of Varkarad, and the Night of Sable Fangs, a harrowing assault waged under a moonless sky, in which every Talon marshal swore an oath to bring back the head of a worm or die unburied in the blood. At its apex stand the Talon marshals, veteran dragon hunters who bear the black harpoons, ancient weapons bestowed only after surviving the trial of scales, a rite in which one must bring down a skyworm alone. Among them are Marshal Dreven Skullthane, famed for cleaving a worm's skull with a single harpoon, a grim perfectionist whose icy demeanour brooks no failure. Marshal Velthra the Hollow-Eyed, who hunts without sleep, consumed by relentless paranoia and haunted visions. And Marshal Corvec Ironspear, whose armour is studded with drake-fangs, a blunt and brutal warrior who laughs only in battle. Below them are the Coil Lords, such as Coil Lord Sivaris the Skinner, a sadistic tactician who flays wormhide to craft his banners, and Coil Lord Kayla of the Brazen Coil, a proud duelist whose flamboyant ruthlessness masks a calculating mind. The Fang-bearers include Vera Clawthane, a cold and methodical tracker famed for dismembering her quarry, and Dawn Blackfang, a stoic giant who fights with grim silence and collects teeth from every worm he fells. Each is distinguished by trophies taken from worms, claws worn as pendants, ribs forged into gorgets, symbols of their mentality, precision for the Talon marshals, cruel artistry for the Coil Lords, and ruthless efficiency for the Fang-bearers. The division's battle honours are legendary. They are credited with the slaying of the 9-headed scourge at the Battle of Ashfang Vale, and the raising of the Ebon Roost, where they impaled the last broodmother of the storm drakes and hung her desiccated carcass from the battlements as a warning to all who would claim dominion of the skies. A spearwoman of serpentine grace and grim poise. Syrene's looks are haunting, her skin pale and almost luminous, crisscrossed with old ritual scars in the shape of fangs and coils. Her long, dark hair woven with scales and tiny bells that chime like distant serpent hisses. Her eyes, an unsettling shade of molten amber, seem to flicker with predatory calculation. She is the very image of her mother, a near-perfect echo of that matriarch's cruel beauty and reptilian elegance, a resemblance that has become both a mantle and a curse in the eyes of those who remember the elder Ampithere matron's deeds. It was said that her mother fought alongside Marshal Vaethra the Pallid at the siege of the Scorched Ares, and that the bloodline of Syrene carries the legacy of those who fought beneath Goran the Chainsworn's banner. Yet while her mother was a warrior of fierce renown, she met a quiet end, felled not by blade or worm, but by a wasting illness that withered her in her final years. Her once proud figure diminished to a frail shadow wrapped in furs. Syrene had been very young when her mother died, and though the memories were few, they were indelible. The cool caress of her mother's hand, the glint of her scales in the lamplight, the faint but sharp scent of oil and steel that clung to her presence. She remembered most of all the hollow ache that followed, the way even the house's Amphitheres seemed subdued in the wake of her passing. The only warmth Kaerth ever showed her came on that day, when for a brief moment he knelt beside the child she was, pulled her close in a rough embrace, and a single tear slipped from his weathered eye to fall into her hair. His calloused hand trembled slightly as it rested on her small back, and for that heartbeat he did not speak a word, as if grief had robbed him of even his bitter aphorisms. That fleeting kindness was never repeated, but remained etched in her mind. A paradox against the ruthless man he became, a moment she would recall in her loneliest nights, wondering whether that tear had cost him more than all the blood he had spilt. That early loss carved a cold emptiness into her heart, a wound she carried into every jewel and every judgment she passed upon the world. Kaerth Vharr stepped into that void not with tenderness, but with ruthless purpose, raising her as both ward and weapon. Her grief for her mother became tangled with a need to earn Kaerth's approval. Every scar she earned and every opponent she felled became proof she could endure, even if she could not fully understand why her mother had faded, while Kaerth remained. A towering, indomitable shadow, his austere presence became the only constant in her life, shaping their relationship into something fierce and fraught. She sought from him the pride her mother's death had stolen, and he gave it only in silence, reinforcing her belief that affection must be earned in blood and scars. Syrene herself trained under Coil lords who had served Sir Kael'thas Wyrm-reaver directly, absorbing the brutal lessons and brutalist creed of these infamous Talon marshals, their ruthless doctrine etched into her flesh and mind alike. Her armour is a masterpiece of lacquered Ampithere scale, each plate etched with curling Ouroboros sigils, designed to flow with her movements like a second serpentine skin. Small steel wings, stylized after Ampithere pinions, jut from her pauldrons, a grim tribute to the aerial harpooners of Dreythal's dragon-hunting corps, and charms from famed subunits of House Ampithere dangle from leather thongs. Rune-inscribed talons, scales burnished to a mirror sheen, and fetishes woven from serpent hide. Her helm, shaped like an unfurling worm's maw, conceals half her face, leaving a cruel smile exposed. Her weapon, Whisperfang, is a barbed lance forged from the twin fangs of river drakes, its shaft a dark lacquered wood wrapped in serpentine leather and adorned with silver filigree that coils like a worm's body. The lance head glimmers with an oily, venomous sheen, the jagged barbs resembling hooked fangs ready to rend flesh. Along its length arcane runes are etched in deep grooves, glowing faintly with a sickly green luminescence that seems to pulse when drawn through the air. A counterweight at its butt is shaped like a drake's skull, polished to a bone-white gleam, giving the weapon a sinister elegance that perfectly reflects Syrene herself. Whisperfang is no ordinary weapon. It once belonged to Talon Marshal Velthra the Hollow-Eyed, and was wielded during the infamous Night of Sable Fangs. Legends say its runes were scribed by the Oracle of the Split Sky to channel venom and shadow alike, and that its fangs came from a river drake slain beneath a blood moon. When Syrene inherited it, the lance carried not only a history of bloodshed, but a legacy of dread, each of its prior wielders meeting a grim end, as if the weapon itself demanded loyalty unto death. Across her belt hangs a secondary implement, a curved ritual knife forged from obsidian dredged from the drowned calderas beneath Dreythal. A weapon not of war, but of sacrament, used to carve sigils into her own flesh before battle. A weathered leather satchel clings to her hip, stitched from drake hide and heavy with talismans, venom phials sealed with wax and claw, and bone fetishes engraved with aphorisms from the old dragon-hunting canticles. Around her neck, a torque of braided iron and scale glimmers dully, its surface etched with house mottos and blood oaths long since broken. As a child, Syrene was raised amid a coiling menagerie of amphitheres, trained from her earliest days to weave between the strikes of venomous serpents and to bleed without flinching. It was her uncle, a grizzled, cantankerous man well into his 70s, named Kaerth Vharr, who oversaw her brutal tutelage. A veteran of countless dragon hunts whose gnarled hands bore the brands and scars of a life steeped in venom and steel. Kaerth was famed for slaying the dusk drake, Vharr, with a single harpoon cast from atop the burning cliffs of Dreythal, and for leading the doomed assault at Redfang Hollow, where half his cohort perished in flame and claw. Yet it was in the training yards, watching Syrene duel her kin and rivals, that his pride burned most fiercely. Though he never voiced it, his scarred face remained impassive as she dispatched opponent after opponent, her precision and cruelty a living echo of his own legacy. The duels themselves were brutal affairs, Syrene fighting with a relentless efficiency, disabling foes with deft strikes to joints and nerves, twisting her lance in vicious parries that left no flourish wasted. Kaerth's cold gaze followed every match. He would stand at the edge of the pit, arms crossed, a silhouette of ruin, his mouth a thin line, concealing the satisfaction he refused to express. The other warriors whispered of how he would sharpen his old harpoons in the dead of night after her victories, as if honouring them in secret. His personal philosophy was as ruthless as the hunts themselves. Mercy is a wound left to fester, he would rasp, believing that strength was measured not in triumph, but in the scars one was willing to bear and the betrayals one was prepared to inflict. Though gruff and irascible, he trained her with an unforgiving diligence, his gravelled voice thick with fatalistic aphorisms and bitter lessons. In the flickering gloom of the training pits, Syrene recalled how Kaerth would hurl barbed harpoons at her feet without warning, forcing her to react with instinct alone. At dusk he would sit hunched over a rusted brazier, recounting his bloodied memories, the gnashing of Vharr's last breath, the ash-slick stones of Redfang Hollow, and the betrayal of comrades who faltered. Sometimes his gravelled voice would trail off into harsh laughter, as he reminded her of the night he severed a mutinous subordinate's hand with his own harpoon, declaring that loyalty must bleed to prove itself. He would test her resolve by ordering her to spar blindfolded, whispering barbed jests that cut deeper than any blade. Even a worm fights cleaner than kin. Would not don't ha' last. In rare, almost tender moments, he would place a calloused hand on her shoulder and grunt, "You'll outlive me. But Dreythal won't outlive its debts. Learn that." He would force Syrene to recite the grim litany of his campaigns, while she cleaned his rust-worn weapons, drilling into her not just skill, but the bleak philosophy of the division. His presence loomed large, a crooked shadow muttering of victories that tasted like ash and glories that left only scars. He demanded she learn the names and fates of every Talon marshal who fell before her time, their triumphs and downfalls engraved into her mind, alongside the bitter truth that the Dreythali kingdom honoured its hunters only when they were dead and martyred. His teachings became etched into her marrow, an inheritance of pragmatism, cruelty and precision that would come to define her every movement and every judgment. Her childhood was a crucible of cruelty, where affection was measured by scars endured and loyalty tested by blood spilled. This shaped her into a creature of fluid cruelty and detached grace. Syrene's personality is a cold enigma, She speaks rarely, and then only in sharp, clipped phrases, weighted with barbed irony. Her utterances reflect the lessons burned into her by Kaerth Vharr. Kindness is a coil, and fools wrap themselves willingly, she would mutter when offered aid. Mercy, that's just a blade dulled by sentiment, she would rasp before striking. Or with a venomous sneer, even a worm fights cleaner than kin. She carries those words like scars, recalling how Kaerth's gravelled voice would rise from memory even in her moments of solitude. Your oath means less than the ash it burns, he had once spat, and she repeated it when breaking promises. Trust is a venom I learned to swallow early, she would whisper, before striking a bargain she intended to betray. Kindness feeds cowards more than meat, he would mutter, when she hesitated in a duel, and steel remembers, flesh forgets, a refrain he taught her to justify every scar carved into her body. These grim aphorisms formed the litany that ran beneath all her actions, shaping her into the ruthless blade he had forged. Other bitter sayings of Kaerth echoed in her mind. The weak die with their mouths open, begging, he would scoff when she hesitated. A clean kill is mercy you waste on beasts, he rasped after every duel. Scars speak louder than lineage, he reminded her whenever nobility dared question her worth, and the hunt ends only when your bones rot in the coil. A phrase he used to close every lesson, leaving her with no illusions about rest or reprieve. She remembered how he would lean close in the training yard, whispering, "Steel doesn't flinch, neither should you," when her arms trembled with exhaustion. "Honor dies faster than flesh," he once muttered, while stitching a gash on her forearm himself. Each phrase was not just instruction, but a brand seared into her psyche, reinforcing the cold creed he had built within her. A creed that, long after his death, still shaped every word she spoke and every blow she struck. She remembered how, after her mother's death, his words became sharper, crueler, filling the silence left behind. "You want tenderness? The worms will give you none," he snapped when she faltered. "A blade has no heart, and neither should you," he told her during her first duel. When she cried quietly one night, thinking herself alone, he appeared from the shadows and hissed, "Tears rust steel, girl. Wipe them away, or bleed instead." These words became iron rails that guided her path, and though she sometimes hated them, she could not let them go. They were all she had of him. She remembered countless moments, Kaerth sitting silent by the brazier after a brutal training day, muttering, "Even the worthy burn," as he ran a whetstone along his harpoon. The night he pulled her aside after she had lost a match and whispered harshly, "Regret softens the blade. Never carry it." Once, as she tended a deep wound on her thigh, he leaned close and said, "Pain teaches cleaner than I ever could." And late one night, long after she thought him asleep, she overheard him rasp softly to himself, "If she outlives me, she will owe no one." These moments were seared into her as much as his sharpest lessons, small glimpses of a brutal affection that shaped her complete. Her worldview is steeped in fatalism. She believes all bonds are ultimately venomous and that trust is a coil waiting to tighten. Her psychological scars run deep. Beneath her poised exterior churns a morass of paranoia and suppressed grief. Sharpened by the winter, her uncle Kaerth passed quietly in his sleep, his absence cutting deeper than any wound she had endured in battle. At his funeral, the sheer number who came, grim warriors, scarred veterans, rival Talon marshals, and even bitter enemies, testified to the shadow he had cast over Dreythal. The frostbitten grounds were ringed by towering braziers burning cold blue flames, their eerie light flickering over banners heavy with frost and scarlet drapery that snapped in the winter wind. A stone bier lay at the centre, Kaerth's body clad in ritual armour, his harpoons arranged in a fan around his corpse like the spines of a slain worm. Black-robed mourners stood motionless along the perimeter, while veterans in battle-scarred armour formed rigid ranks, their spears inverted in a silent salute. The air was thick with the scent of ash, cold iron, and burning pitch, as if the very sky mourned alongside them. Syrene stood among them, her expression a mask of cold detachment, yet inside she felt an ache so sharp it stole her breath, an emptiness as vast as the skies her kin once ruled. As the wind bit her skin, she recalled the countless evenings at Kaerth's side, listening to his tales by the brazier's glow, the rasp of his voice as he recounted hunts long past, his gruff chuckle when she bested her rivals, the rough weight of his hand on her shoulder after every grueling duel. Each face she saw in that crowd was a reminder of the legacy Kaerth had forged, yet none could match the private bond they had shared. Quiet glances that spoke of hard-earned respect, wordless lessons in every blow he struck and every scar he bore. She felt exposed amid this frozen tableau of stoic grief, the pageantry of their mourning alien to her raw pain, her grief locked behind the impassive amber gaze that let no one see how profoundly she mourned. And as she watched them, their stoic faces impassive, their bodies rigid in ceremonial armour, she recognized that not one of them had truly known him. They mourned the legend, the ruthless mentor, the symbol of Dreythal's cruel creed. But she alone mourned the man who had whispered grim truths by firelight, who had watched her with a pride he never admitted, whose silence had spoken volumes only she could decipher. She envied their cold indifference, their ability to fold grief into ritual and duty, while hers was a raw wound she could neither display nor heal. In her mind she replayed their final conversation, a rare moment when Kaerth's voice had softened and he had told her, "You were always the sharpest fang in my coil." That memory burned in her chest, even as the frost crusted the funeral grounds around her boots, a secret flame of grief and pride that would never be shared with those who had gathered in such number, yet felt so distant. The pain twisted inward, manifesting in restless rituals of self-discipline and sudden, lethal fury, as if every harpoon she sharpened and every scar she carved into herself could fill the void he left. A few years after Kaerth's death, her distrust was vindicated when Commander Althrin Corvalis, a man known to be kind with children and fair in adjudication, a figure who cultivated an image of dignity and generosity, yet whose private appetites concealed a darker flaw, an insidious urge to prey upon the innocence of strong young warrior women, an urge that ultimately sealed his doom when he crossed Syrene. Corvalis, a higher-ranking officer whose lineage wielded political sway within Dreythal's war councils as patriarch of the Corvalis faction, a cabal of opportunistic nobles and merchant lords who sought to entwine their fortunes with the division's glory, while never sullying themselves in the bloodied pits, attempted to force himself upon her. Without hesitation, she drove Whisperfang through his throat in the barracks yard before a dozen witnesses. No words were exchanged, no explanation offered. Her blade sang, and Corvalis fell, clutching at the gaping wound as arterial blood fountained from his throat, soaking the stone beneath him. He gagged and sputtered, crimson froth spilling over his polished armour, his patrician mask of composure dissolving into wide-eyed terror. His limbs thrashed weakly, boots scraping uselessly at the blood-slick ground as the life fled him in choking gasps, each one weaker than the last until, finally, his glazed eyes fixed skyward, unseeing. For a long moment, the yard was silent, the dozen witnesses frozen in place, their expressions a mix of horror, awe, and grim vindication. One veteran muttered, "By the worms, she gutted him like a beast," while another stared at the spreading pool of blood and whispered, "It was bound to happen. He asked for it." Others simply watched, faces pale, gripping their weapons more tightly as if unsure whether they would be next. Some turned their eyes away, unable to meet her gaze as she withdrew Whisperfang with a slow, deliberate twist, blood dripping from its venomous barbs. None stepped forward to stop her as she walked away, her name already growing heavier in their minds and in whispers that would soon carry across the kingdom. Though his family demanded her execution, the respect she commanded among the warriors and the shadow of Kaerth Vharr's legacy stayed their hand. Instead of death, she was cast into exile, a living reminder of both her deed and her skill. But this outcome reflected the rot at the heart of Dreythal's meritocracy, a society that celebrated martial skill while turning a blind eye to the darkness it bred. Many of Dreythal's leaders, masters of war like General Maelric Warbrand, mine lords such as Baron Deepdelve, merchant princes like Guildmaster Coinvane, and healers like Surgeon Magus Scalebinder, hid sins behind their battle honours. Miners beat their wives to death deep in the shafts, their bodies hidden in abandoned caverns long since deemed useless. None more infamous than old Carrick Redmore, a seasoned miner who married often and murdered each wife in turn when his legendary temper inevitably frayed. His victims lie scattered across abandoned shafts, their bones swallowed by dust and shadow, while his name lingers as a bitter curse in the mining camps. Carrick himself was a grizzled figure of compact, sinewy strength, his back perpetually stooped from decades in the tunnels. His skin was seared and coarse from years at the forge face, his beard a wiry mass shot through with iron grey, and his eyes, small, yellowed and feral, glimmered with a volatile temper that made even his fellow miners tread warily. His weathered face was scored with scars from brawls and collapses, and his crooked nose gave him a wolfish profile. Despite his battered visage, he exuded a primal magnetism that lured many wives to their doom, drawn to a man who embodied the raw, brutal spirit of Dreythal's underbelly, those forsaken tunnels where stale air tastes of rust and regret, echoing with the drip of poisoned water and the creak of forgotten timbers, where no lantern burns, and even vermin dare not dwell. Surgeons kidnap children from orphanages and village outskirts, dragging them into lightless subterranean wards beneath Dreythal's citadel. There, brutal super-soldier programs twisted young bodies and minds alike, suturing dragon-scale grafts into tender flesh, replacing bones with hardened worm ivory, and flooding veins with searing concoctions brewed from drake venom and molten silver. Their limbs were reshaped to wield harpoons as extensions of themselves, their eyes burned with alchemical fire to grant night sight. All in the name of crafting more perfect dragon hunters, soldiers stripped of innocence and rebuilt as living weapons. Many were left mindless, their failures discarded into mass graves beneath the citadel itself. Among them were particular children remembered only in ghostly whispers. Illyra, whose spine was reforged into a harpoon's shaft, but who died screaming when her flesh rejected the graft. Mryn, whose blood was replaced with liquid silver and who burned from within, and twins San and Vey, whose bonded minds were severed by experimentation, leaving them vacant-eyed and obedient before vanishing into the caverns. These lost children became cautionary tales among Dreythal's ranks, their names etched into the hidden walls of abandoned wards where their ghosts are said to linger. Merchants profited from the opium-like dried culta leaves smuggled from the western pinelands, a trade that fueled a rising tide of drug abuse in Dreythali cities. Kaltar dens choke the alleyways with their bitter smoke, and entire districts languish in haze and dependency, their populace hollowed by addiction, while the merchant princes count their coin. The decline touches every aspect of daily life. Market stalls rot unsold as their owners collapse in stupors. Artisans leave commissions unfinished as trembling hands reach for cultar pipes. Watchmen stagger through patrols dulled by smoke haze. Children roam hungry in alleys where laughter once rang. And once proud veterans of the dragon hunts beg in gutters, their pension coin squandered for another draught of oblivion. The very air of Dreythali cities feels thick with despair, the streets shadowed not only by crumbling stone, but by a people undone from within. Commander Corvalis embodied this hypocrisy. A man in his late 40s of imposing stature, his frame broad-shouldered and clad in gilded armour, his face a mask of patrician handsomeness, marred by a perpetual smirk that hinted at his cruelty. Age had refined his appearance rather than diminished it. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was always immaculately combed, and his beard trimmed to perfection. His skin, weathered yet smooth, bore only faint lines, suggesting a life of privilege buffered from true hardship, and his ice-grey eyes gleamed with predatory calculation, their gaze sharpened by years of power and impunity. Every gesture he made seemed deliberate, economical, polished. The careful vanity of a man who aged with the intention of looking ever more authoritative, a predator perfected by time. Features like these made him seem every inch the ideal Dreythali officer. He was revered for his battlefield prowess, and his predations were tolerated even by those whose wives he violated. The ethos of Dreythal whispered, "The strong do as they will, the weak suffer as they must." In this world, some claim that Corvalis had a right to take what he wanted, his skill granting him license. This creed poisoned even her legacy. While some viewed Syrene's act as justified, others saw it as an affront to Dreythal's brutal pragmatism, a disruption of the unspoken order that valorized might over morality. That act sealed her fate and confirmed what Kaerth had taught. Mercy was a wound she could not afford. The incident became an unspoken stain, fueling both her banishment and the fearful reverence with which her name was thereafter spoken. Even during her exile, Kaerth's shadow lingered. She would recall the bitter taste of the training yard dust, the thrum of the crowd's grim silence as she bested each rival, her uncle's impassive glare watching from the periphery. A silence that concealed a pride he never voiced, but that she felt in the chill air between them. In moonless nights spent wandering desolate borderlands, she would recall the bitter taste of the training yard dust, the crack of bone beneath her practiced strikes, and the grim silence of the crowd as she bested her opponents one by one. Her uncle's impassive glare would linger in her mind, not praise, not warmth, but a cold pride she had felt only in the taut line of his jaw, and the way his hand rested heavier on his old harpoon afterward. Sometimes she would catch herself repeating his bitter axioms aloud to no one, as if his ghost sat beside her brazier. She would sharpen Whisperfang while recalling his coarse laughter, murmuring, "Mercy is a wound left to fester." These memories formed her armour as much as steel and scale, binding her more tightly to his grim creed than to any nation. Exiled after leading a purge that saw her kin's rivals impaled on obsidian pikes and fed to her house's own amphipters, she now wanders as a solitary huntress, a living testament to the venomous legacy of the Ampithere Division. Her mind is a desolate fortress, beset by ghosts and calcified by grief. Trust, affection, and kinship are scars she dares not reopen. Isolation defines her not only in exile but in spirit. Every encounter weighed as a threat. Every kindness suspected as treachery in waiting. Her fatalism is no longer just philosophy but reflex, her soul a coil of readiness, bitterness and loss, honed by the grim lessons of Kaerth and the brutal creed of the Division. Since her exile, she has wandered far beyond Dreythal, seeking out duels in distant courts and lawless frontiers, where challengers craved reputation by crossing blades with the infamous Exile. Her path is a tapestry of bloodied sand, rain-soaked battlefields, and torch-lit arenas, each duel a ruthless dance of precision and cruelty. In nameless villages she left graveyards of would-be hunters, and in grand halls she slew champions before silent, fearful crowds. Her travels took her through wind-swept canyons, crumbling citadels, and serpent-infested jungles, each landscape echoing her internal desolation, each opponent another chance to affirm that she needed no kin, no country, only the art of survival sharpened to perfection. In the shadowed pits of Varnhollow, she duelled a feral exile called Urvos Bloodbind, known for choking foes with his spiked chain. In the flooded halls of Old Kaerth, she clashed with Sarathin the Tidebreaker, a former corsair lord whose trident was said to carry the salt of 100 shipwrecks. She faced the twin assassins Keth and Mora in the moonlit alleys of Kaerth Vharr, their blades poisoned and their attacks perfectly synchronized. And in the shattered arena of Ashenvolt, she defeated Lord Varric Ironwhite, an aging but still deadly champion clad in rusted plate and drake hide. These duels became legend along her path, the blood she spilled a grim testament to her skill, her reputation growing like a storm no one could master. Some chroniclers now whisper of her clash against the bone-masked warlord Tharic Scorn in the ruins of Molcadron, where the dust turned to mud from blood and rain. Others tell of her victory over Alicia Veilshade, a shadow dancer of the Freehold Isles whose blades were laced with rare toxins and whose grace nearly matched Syrene's own. In the mountain stronghold of Kaerth Vharr, she toppled champion Joreth Stonevein, a brute whose hammer had cracked war beasts' skulls, but whose fury proved no match for her precise cruelty. In each duel, Syrene's methods reflected the lessons of the Ampithere: ruthless efficiency, dispassionate brutality, and a refusal to grant mercy, leaving survivors only to spread fear of her name. Yet the years of wandering exacted a toll, her mind a patchwork of exhaustion and quiet despair, worn thin by the endless cycle of blood and solitude. In every borderland tavern she felt herself a ghost haunting foreign soil. In every battlefield she found no glory, only the hollow echo of her uncle's bitter lessons. Paranoia gnawed at her, trust became an impossibility, and even sleep offered no refuge. Dreams were drenched in blood and memory. Her soul hardened into something cold and distant, so that even her victories felt like defeats, and every step deeper into exile drove her further from any home she might have claimed. Her fighting style evolved with this erosion of spirit, where once she fought with ruthless precision born of discipline and doctrine, now she moved with a detached lethality, each strike efficient but devoid of flourish, a grim mechanism honed by endless repetition. She no longer sought dominance, but elimination, her parries stripped of elegance, her footwork driven only by instinct and muscle memory. To onlookers, she appeared a cold wraith of battle, her expression blank as she cut down foes, her gaze empty save for flashes of grim calculation. The years of roaming had left their mark on her appearance, her once lustrous dark hair, now streaked with silver, and tied in haphazard knots, her pale skin weathered by sun, wind and frost, marked by new scars layered over the old ritual wounds. The bells, once woven into her hair, were tarnished and many lost, their chimes muted. Her armour bore scratches, dents and patches where fresh scale had been riveted over broken plating, yet she carried it all with unbending grace, a living monument to endurance. Even among this battered austerity, she would occasionally stop at roadside markets and lonely caravanserais to barter for provisions, her presence chilling the air around her. The merchants she traded with spoke in hushed tones of her haunted appearance, the gleam of her amber eyes too sharp for comfort, her movements too deliberate, her silence too heavy. When she approached, their chatter would falter into mutters. "She looks like a ghost with a spear," one would whisper, avoiding her gaze. "Don't ask her name. Names bring curses," another would hiss. At a caravanserai, an old cloth seller once muttered to a colleague, "That one's eyes like looking into a pit where worms drown." Some viewed her as a portent of misfortune, others as a walking legend, and all felt uneasy as they took her coin, wondering what ghosts travelled with her, and whether they too would someday become another tale trailing in her wake. Their mutterings did not stop once she departed. Her shadow's longer than her spear, an old spice merchant murmured as he packed his wares, spitting for luck. A glassblower in a distant town swore he heard her lance sing when drawn from her back, whispering in some forgotten tongue. Travellers who shared a fire after she passed through would speak cautiously. "If you meet her gaze, best look away. Her eyes carry old grief," said a caravan guard, while another muttered, "She doesn't just carry ghosts, she is one." Their unease rippled outward, shaping her legend among borderland folk. A solitary wraith who moved between camps and caravans, leaving silence and rumours in her wake. Some merchants recalled in fearful tones her rare utterances, a clipped nod to a mule driver accompanied by the words, "Fairer beasts than men," or the way she once handed a tinker a tarnished coin and said quietly, "May it buy you silence." Travellers huddled around fires spoke of how she never ate or drank among them, her hood drawn low and her gaze distant, as if she walked in two worlds. Even hardened caravan guards gave her wide berth, remarking, "Best leave that one her distance. There's ice in her bones and vipers in her shadow." These reactions only deepened her myth, making her a figure both feared and pitied. A living omen whose passing left the air colder and conversation hushed. In distant lands, tales took root among border tribes and river folk. That she was a revenant seeking penance, that her lance, Whisperfang, whispered not to her but to her victims, that she had bartered her soul to a forgotten god of serpents. Children were warned not to stray after dusk, lest the silver-haired huntress walk the road. Tavern stories painted her as both assassin and avenger, some claiming she could slip unseen between shadows, others that she could scent betrayal like a viper tastes the air. Her myth blurred truth and invention, yet in every retelling, her amber eyes remained constant, sharp, cold, and watching. She conserved movement so completely that even her killing blows seemed weary, yet no less fatal. Her combat bore the weight of a soul long resigned to violence as the only constant, and this made her even more terrifying. For her opponents saw not hunger for glory in her eyes, but exhaustion, and yet she killed them all the same. Thanks for venturing into the storm with me. Every tale in this universe, from the shattered kingdoms to the cursed bloodlines, I write myself. All the art, all the visuals, every drop of atmosphere you feel, that's shaped by hand and pieced together with my passion to create. These stories take a lot of time to make real, so thank you for your patience when the drops take longer than I'd like. If you felt something during this journey, if you got goosebumps, held your breath, or just needed a break from the noise of the real world, Do me a solid, like the video, subscribe for more, and share it with a nerdy friend who needs to touch grass or get scorched by Atlas's lightning. Your support keeps this storm alive.